Leeza's Care Connection, a community of support and education for creating strong, empowered family caregivers.
Thank you. Thank you for me being here. Before I start talking a little bit, my mother and I had a very interesting relationship. I stayed home until I was 27 years old. My mom didn't drive, and I figured it'd be easier for me to stay there and take her where she needed to go than have to pick her up. But she was a very interesting woman. I wrote the book. Mom's been gone 10 years. I wrote the book 5 years ago. Come and read the dedication. It was dedicated to my mother, but I can't read it out loud. I still can't read it out loud without crying. I wanted caregivers to know they weren't alone. They're not alone. When I became my mother's caregiver to where she moved into our home, I had already been flying to and from West Palm Beach, I would say every 3 months, and staying a week or so and helping her, and I knew things weren't going well. But when she finally had to come and live with us and I became her full-time caregiver, we had just moved to South Carolina. I was still in my early 50s. So there were people who had not yet hit the stage where they were caregiving a beloved parent or a sibling or anything like that. And so what I didn't understand about Southern culture is when I would have a bad day and I would say something about dealing with something with Mom, and I'd hear, well, bless your heart. I thought they were sympathizing with me. I was quite shocked to find out that was not a nice thing. But believe it or not, though, every single one of those women have come to me now and not really apologized, but made it right, because they're all caregivers now of one sort or another, and they're understanding my exhaustion, my fears, my worries. Now I'm going to tell some of her funny stories. I'm going to tell a funny doctor story right now. I hated going to the neurologist with her. Well, mostly because I hated the neurologist, but there aren't that many in Aiken, because I'd be sitting there crying in front of him. She'd be out in the waiting room, and I'd be crying about she's doing this, and I don't know what to do about that, and is there anybody I can call? Can you help me? And he'd just stare at me. And then he'd push an appointment card across the desk and a prescription for Namenda and Aricept and walk out the room. He has no idea how close he came to death. But, I mean, really. But I would take Mom in to see him every 6 months, because that's the only way I could get a prescription. And he did sleep studies. So here would be my mother. They would call us, and it would be the medical assistant, my mother, and me. And we're heading down to the appointment room or the examination room, and she'd look in a doorway. And then she'd walk up and she'd look in another doorway. And then she'd come back and look at this doorway. And all of a sudden, every time, she would stop and bellow at the top of her lungs, "What the heck kind of doctor is this? He's got bedrooms everywhere." And I would go, "Sex therapist, Mom, we're here to get you hooked up." She had no idea what that meant. But she would always go, it just made her day. And I also want to rebut, you see these movies, the thing is to have a parent who you didn't get along with, now you're taking care of them with Alzheimer's and yada, 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 they're all kind of the same. And the movies make it look so warm and so wonderful, and it's not like the time when we were having all of my husband's bosses over for a great big barbecue, and everybody was starting to show up, and they were all coming up the doorway or up the driveway, and I smelled something really bad. And we had elderly dogs at the time. So I thought, okay, let me figure out which dog had an oopsie. Well, it wasn't the dog that had the oopsie. It was my mother. And it was everywhere in the bathroom. Walls, mirrors, sink, toilet, shower, curtain, everything. I got the big bosses walking in. It took me 7 minutes to strip that bathroom down, throw up some towels. I sprayed everything with alcohol. Then I sprayed everything with something that smelled good. I took everything that I had taken out, stuffed it in a bag, and put it behind the fence in my neighbor's yard. And and hope nobody. I did go back and get it and apologize to the neighbor. They understood. And but they don't show this stuff on Hallmark, do they? Yeah, but things like this really, really do happen. And the other thing too, and this is one of the hardest things to deal with as a caregiver, you're going to walk the walk alone 9 times out of 10. or 99 times out of 100. I always say nobody's going to be there to help, but they'll be there at the reading of the will. I cannot tell you how many times I would beg for a member of my family, not naming names, can you just come for 2 or 3 days and just let my husband and I get away or whatever. I was in the hospital for a week, and because the stress was really getting to me. I have since lost a large number of intestines from Crohn's disease, autoimmune disease, and I also had lymphoma. And never been really sick until I was a caregiver for 10 years. And then when my stepdad died, that's when I started seeing the changes. And what I saw was she was forgetting appointments. She would go to the doctor and scream and yell at them because they didn't write down her appointment, except she never made an appointment. She would just show up, or she wouldn't show up for appointments that she had. Her physical cleanliness took a hit. And Mom was one of those ladies that went to the beauty shop every week. And now I'm noticing her hair looked kind of greasy, and she hadn't had it colored for a while, and that was unusual. Bills were not getting paid on time. She calls me one day and she goes, Hartford is going to cancel my insurance. And I said, well, why? And she said, well, they said I'm not paying my bill. And I said, well, when did the last time you paid a bill? She said, I paid it for the year 3 months ago. And I said, well, how much was that? She said, $29. I said, we'll take care of it, Mom. I called Hartford and I said, send everything to me. She forgot how to write a check, but she didn't know how to use a debit card. So I would come down and visit her. We would go to the bank. She would sign a blank check for cash and hand it to the teller and say, I want $50. Now, she wouldn't check with the teller to see if that check was really written for just $50. She'd been doing that for a long time. I suspected she wasn't eating well, just from what was in the refrigerator. I could tell by looking at her meds that she was very sporadic at taking them. But she would call people repeatedly. We still had family in Pittsburgh, so she would call like one of her nieces at 10 in the morning, 11:15, 12:30. 1:45, 3 in the afternoon, 6 at night, and she would never remember she had called, and of course her calling me. She'd get ready for work in the middle of the night and wait for somebody to pick her up, and she'd sit there all night. On my 50th birthday, I got a phone call that she was in the hospital with AFib. It was 2 days before Christmas. On Christmas Day, I got on a train, went down to West Palm Beach. And luckily for me, my mother had a great reverence for doctors, unlike me. And I came into her hospital room and I said, the doctors won't let you live alone anymore. You have a choice. You have to live with me or go into a nursing home. Well, she came and she lived with me, and I'm really glad she did, because it wasn't until she was in my house and I saw her day after day that I realized how much of her mental acuity she'd lost. What happened was she forgot me one day in 10 minutes. Mom liked to eat in her room at night and watch Walker, Texas Ranger. She had a crush on Walker. So I had brought her dinner, and she wanted to eat in her room on a tray. And sitting down at dinner with my husband, and I heard this scream, and I heard plates breaking and glasses breaking. I came running in her room. She was hysterical because little Sandy hadn't come home from school that day. I said, Mom, I'm Sandy. I know you're Sandy. I want little Sandy. 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, she went from knowing me. She never knew me again as her daughter. Never knew me again as her daughter. But it was very hard. I mean, it's very hard, especially, like I said, once she forgot who I was, I could no longer reason with her. I could no longer calm her down. She accused me of stealing. Of course, that's across the board. That's across the board. I have yet to meet a caregiver who has not been accused of stealing. You know, don't get your feelings hurt. It's like one of those things that happen. I worked for a doctor as the administrative manager for 3 years, and she was the whole family's doctor. Now, I don't have any medical training, but you know what happens when somebody works at a doctor's office? They become too dangerous for words. You know, you think you know everything because you see everything. So I come home from work one day and Mom's color wasn't right. I'm looking at her and I'm like, you feel okay? She goes, yeah, I feel fine. I said, nothing hurts or anything? No, I'm fine. I'm like, okay. Come home the next day. She looks like she had dove into a pit of golden, spicy brown mustard. I mean, she is so yellow. Now I'm freaking out. Now, my position allowed me to set up CAT scans and all sorts of lab work at the hospital. So I am on the phone. I want a liver CT, and I want a full panel, and I want a bilirubin, and a couple hours later, and I called the doctors. I said, I'm not coming in tomorrow. Something's wrong with Mom. I'll bring her by. And I'm thinking, now, wait a minute. Her eyes aren't jaundiced. Her eyes aren't yellow. If there was something wrong with her liver, it would show up in the eyes as well. So I always respected her privacy, but she goes to bed that night, and I'm just going through everything in her bathroom, and I come on to a tube of Jergens self-tanner. And I'm like, when did she get this? So Sheila, I had a caregiver 6 hours a day. Sheila, I stayed home the next day. But Sheila comes in, and I go, do you know when Mom got this? She goes, I don't want to tell you this, but your mom is shoplifting now. And I'm like, what? And she goes, well, she doesn't really mean to shoplift, but she can't do the cart anymore. And she has her walker, so she just puts everything in her purse that she wants. And she said, when we get to the cash register, I take everything out of her purse for her to pay for it. But this time, that had kind of, Sheila had missed that. So Mom wakes up a couple hours later, and I'm like, hey, Mom, what's this? And she goes, that's my new moisturizer. She said, I love it. I am using it 3 and 4 times a day everywhere. Needless to say, it took weeks for me to live down. The hospital was laughing at me. The doctors were out. The staff was like, don't set up any more appointments, Andy. The reason we had to place her, and I'm going to tell you, I waited too long to place her. I felt horrible about the thought of placing my mother. I can't do this. I can't put her away. I can't do this to her. The day came when I could no longer make excuses why I didn't place her. I had taken her to the beauty shop. I was driving her home. Now, you're not from Macon, but Pine Log Road is a road that goes through the county, but there's no shoulders, 2 lanes. And we get in the car. She's very agitated and wants to know where Sandy is, where's Sandy. And all of a sudden, she looks at me. I'd never seen such hate on her face. And she goes, you sold my daughter to the gypsies, and I'm going to go find her. And with that, she opens the car door and tries to jump out. She could not get the seat belt. And she was much smaller than me. And so I pretty much had a good handle on her. But I called my husband. I said, we're on the way to the hospital. And I said, this is it. We have to place her. I'd already chosen a facility. And she didn't get placed until Tuesday. So basically, I had to keep her completely sedated on Ativan because all she'd do is look at me and start screaming that I'd sold Sandy to the gypsies. That, I feel, was, I had waited too long. It did not have to be that fraught with emotion and stress. Hey, she was my mom, You make decisions based upon emotions. And they're not always good decisions. I mean, I can look back at some of my old boyfriends and say I wasn't good at that then either. On her 85th birthday, I was throwing a surprise party. I was throwing a big pizza party, and I had actually arranged for Iron City beer to be brought in from Pittsburgh. And they arranged everybody's meds so everybody in the memory care unit could have 1 beer. And she slipped and broke her hip 2 hours before the party. And so I'm waiting in the ambulance bay for her. They're yelling at me in the hospital, get out of the bay. I'm like, no, it's my mother. But they bring her out, and by this time I wasn't calling her mom anymore because that agitated her because I wasn't her little Sandy. So I was calling her Helen, and I'm like, Helen, you were a bartender. You have the beer, then you fall and hurt yourself. You just messed the whole thing up. You don't do it first. She thought that was funny. She sailed through her hip replacement, literally sailed through her hip replacement, and passed away 2 days later of her heart had failed. And we were with her. And we're walking across the parking lot after she had passed away, and I went, oh, she's going to kick my butt. And Dale like, what? I said, I didn't tell her Uncle George died. Now she knows. I mean, she probably got up. She probably walked through the pearly gates and said, what are you doing here? It's like, I fell down the stairs 3 months ago. Didn't you know?
For more information about Leeza's Care Connection, please visit our website at leezascareconnection.org and follow us on social media.